Thank you all for coming. My name is Yaw Nyarko. I'm a professor of economics here at NYU. I'm also the director of NYU's Africa House. It's an interdisciplinary group, institute devoted to the promotion of Africa, getting the word about Africa out, especially all the good news, because it's usually bad news you hear. Today's event is going to be I know it's going to be a wonderful event. I need to acknowledge a number of people. First of all, the student groups, African Law Association, African Student Union, the Development Research Institute, Law and Social Entrepreneurship Association, Stern in Africa, Stern Social Enterprise Association, Wagner Students Alliance for Africa, and of course my own department, the NYU Department of Economics. They also helped in putting all of this together. Okay, I'm a faculty member here, and I talk to a lot of students all the time. And it's just great to see young people starting off their careers and their lives, and you just interact with them. Sometimes they'll come back to your office, say hi or something, and every now and then you'll get into some kind of, somebody will write you a letter and say, this is what I've been doing in my life, and this is where I intend to go in the future. And then you see them in the future, and it's just fantastic. So I was digging out, I was cleaning my apartment, and so here's a letter, okay? And it goes, hi, Yaw. Surprise, yes, it's me. Writing to you. How are you? How is life? And this was a long time ago at Cornell. I was at Cornell many, many years ago. Anyway, this person moved to another place. Life in this other place, I won't mention it because I don't want to embarrass this person, has been quite a different experience than what I previously imagined. Things are much quieter, i.e. dull, and people are just not as friendly as at Cornell. I'm working at this place, which as you might know is a bit of a radical pro-South, dependence-oriented organization where people just talk all day long. In other words, this organization typifies what has become of North-South dialogue and development economics in general. You just read it, this person's gonna make it. On one side, crying, screaming, and pointing fingers, while on the other side, puts cotton in their ears and politely smiles and asks for yet another in-depth study. This person's really gonna be doing great work. He goes on and on and on about development. And the part I like is, the topic I have chosen for the work is the effect of primary commodity markets in promoting economic integration agreements among developing countries. Okay? So it goes on about everything that's going on. As regards my future plans, I went ahead and applied for agricultural economics, and I have been accepted at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Michigan State. I'm following this person's career. This person then goes to Stanford, gets a PhD in applied economics, wins Best Dissertation Award for the PhD thesis done at Stanford, leaves Stanford, goes to a whole series of international organizations, the World Bank, IFPRI, UNCTAD, is winning many, many awards in the home country, and sets up a commodities exchange in Ethiopia. So this person, this letter, she doesn't know this, but this letter is how many years old? Okay. So I'm actually telling you the story about Eleni, okay? So she wrote this in the days before there was internet, when people actually wrote letters, okay? And as I was ruffling through my old things, this thing is decades old. You can see the brown stains on it, okay? So I'm very, very happy to call up here the writer of this note here, who of course is a very, very successful person now, has been on TED in her home country, Ethiopia, is one of the big stars. You're going on the taxi, and if you ever get lost and you want to, figure out, who do you know so you can call, right? You mentioned her name, the taxi drivers know who she is. So on that note, let's big round of applause for Eleni Gabre-Madhin, who wrote this letter. You probably didn't know this, right?
Shocked. Just be careful what you write. But yes, Yaw, thank you for that introduction. I've been sort of obsessed about this topic for several decades. So you are getting indeed, as my old and very good friend Yaw shared with you, a sense that I've had that we can do things in our lifetime to change the course of events, that things don't need to be what they are. And so I happen to be blessed and fortunate to have found relatively early on in my career that little corner of the world and of reality that I decided was my problem, my pursuit, and I guess my quest for a solution. So that problem is what I'm going to be talking about, but more importantly and more excitingly, I'm going to be talking about the solution. So that said, may I say that as a disclaimer, that my friend Yaw, in inviting me to speak today, said, oh, we'll just have an informal gathering of a few students. We'll sit around a table, it'll be just casual and friendly, which I know it is friendly, of course, but this is a much more dignified setting. So thank you for all coming, and thank you for your interest in this story, and I hope to do justice to your expectations. So basically, our dream in Ethiopia, and this is something that I've held, as you heard, for decades, but something that in Ethiopia came to be really something that, as a country and as a society, we started to get mobilized around, was in the aftermath of the 2002 food crisis that happened in Ethiopia. And so 2001, 2002, early on, were very good bumper harvests in Ethiopia. And so prices started to collapse. I was based in Washington. I was an economist working in Washington. And my organization was asked to come and give advice on what to do with this huge surplus that was leading to the collapse of prices. So IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, decided to ask me to go and talk to the government about this problem. So we started talking about how did Asia do it, when India and Pakistan started having their green revolution, how did they address collapsing prices, and what should we do here in Ethiopia. And so we were talking about the different things that we should be doing or thinking about doing. And I went back to Washington, and 2 months later, in June 2002, I heard or saw the food aid appeal for 14 million people under risk of starvation, an appeal for about 300,000 tons of grain to be delivered to Ethiopia, which was roughly, almost amazingly, exactly the amount of grain that we had suspected was the surplus that needed to be somehow disposed of or dealt with. So I got on a plane and immediately went to Addis Ababa and said, what happened? Where's the surplus? Just months ago, we were trying to figure out what to do with surplus, and now we are back to begging the world for food aid. So there's something very, very wrong. So that crisis led to a question about how we could do things differently. And that created a space that started a conversation about markets and the role of distribution. And in fact, very poignantly, I guess, maybe a word I could use, in 1984, when we had the very terrible famine, the one that launched the whole food aid business, so to speak, and the Live Aid and all those things that happened back then, there actually was a surplus in Western Ethiopia. And so this thing is not something new, it's something that had been repeating itself, and so that was really where we started. So I want to now fast forward a little bit to how we got to thinking about how to set up an exchange and what we wanted to do and why we felt it was important. So the dream that we had was to build a world-class institution that would link buyers and sellers together in as reliable and efficient a way as possible, and signal Ethiopia's entry into the modern global market. But not only to do that, but to do it in a way that really would symbolize or exemplify what Ethiopia, or the new Ethiopia, could achieve in terms of bringing like-minded people together in business, since this is I guess this is not the business school anymore. It was supposed to be. I thought I was speaking at the Stern building, but anyway. So from a business side of things, is to set up a company that would really symbolize commitment to excellence, passion, innovation, doing things really as creatively and as rapidly as possible, and so on. Now, why we created ECX, I've already referred to it, but why the rationale for it really came from is not because it's sexy to have a national commodity exchange like a national airline, or not because such and such country had done it and so should we. We focused on the fact that there were problems. There was a problem that this institution could solve. And those problems had to do with the unreliable supply chain, the rampant contract default, volatile prices, unreliable trading partners, lack of informed information or weak information, unregulated actors, unlicensed, didn't know where to find them when they cheated you, you couldn't go back and find them, uncoordinated market between buyers and sellers, people couldn't find each other, high risks, high costs, etc. So basically what we set about doing is trying to find a solution grounded in the market as opposed to an administrative solution. And as you probably all know, students of Africa, we spent the 70s, 60s and 70s being recommended to set up marketing boards where governments should do these things that we're talking about, solve these problems, set up institutions that would be monopoly buyers or monopoly sellers and set prices and pretty much administer the market. Of course, that gave way to the 80s and 90s, where that model was considered a bad thing, and rightly so, and governments were then advocated to get out of the market altogether and let the free market do its magic. The private sector would come in and we should liberalize everything, and in many countries that actually happened, but without the intended outcomes. So the wave we are in now, the third wave, I'd like to think of it as, is one in which it's neither about governments doing it all or about governments doing nothing at all, but really finding a balance of how governments can work with the private sector and can create an enabling environment. So in that sense, what we try to do as we set up a market-based solution for these problems is to find a more reliable way to connect buyers and sellers, an efficient way to discover prices, that's at the end of the day the core function of an exchange, a way to bring transparency and level the playing field so that everybody had access to the same information, a way to incentivize better quality and to minimize risk. So basically the idea that we came up with and the design, and I think my years, decades of, I happened to give an interview about this morning, about how a researcher goes into something so operational. And my answer, which I think is valid, is that it was really the ability to distill knowledge and come up with a model based on trying to understand really what the world's attempts in this area had been, and where the failures were, where the successes were, and to design something as an institution that was not a copy-paste of any particular model, neither of the traditional Western exchanges, including the ones here in New York, Chicago, and around the US, but also not the emerging, some of the emerging market exchanges like China or India or South Africa. So we looked at all of these models and more. We looked at Eastern European recent models, we looked at Latin American models. We went and visited these countries, visited the exchanges, met with professionals that ran these exchanges, and then came back and created what we think of as an Ethiopian exchange for Ethiopia, which has a very unique design and what we felt was based on learning from the global experience, but tailored to our country conditions, and with some of the very important unique features. The first being that contrary to the typical pattern, we said we were going to start as a spot exchange and then graduate to evolve towards futures trading. I remember a big debate with our Indian counterparts about how that was a terrible idea, and how we basically tried to convince them. And funnily enough, in 2008, India passed legislation saying that the Indian exchanges were out of alignment with the market fundamentals, and that in fact they should have spot exchanges attached to the futures exchanges. And so that's been a trend recently, and there was a headline that came out that somebody really think India should look at what Ethiopia's model. So life is interesting that way. The other thing we decided to do very consciously was to start as an open outcry, a physical trading floor, even though building an electronic trading system was within our reach. We had technology, but we didn't feel it was appropriate for Ethiopia, that because of the very low internet penetration, below 1%, mobile penetration below 5%. So in another African country, maybe this would not be the way we would have done it, but in Ethiopia it was appropriate. A very important part of what we set out in terms of design was to have an exchange that would be small actor oriented. I was in Ghana a few months ago, and I said, we have not built an exchange for the suits, for the Harvard Business School of Columbia, or NYU's Term Business School graduates. Of course, they're all welcome, but it's an exchange which explicitly said, we're going to take the informal market, the informal actors, people with less than high school certificate, and tailor the market for them. And that's what we've done. The other thing that is very unusual about our model is the scope, or the breadth of the scope of operations. So because Ethiopia doesn't have a sophisticated collateral management industry, there are no independent clearinghouse corporations as you have here. Basically, our exchange set up a business model that really has a very holistic and broad scope of operations. We don't plan to stay in all of these businesses, but at the moment we run 5 businesses: quality certification with labs around the countryside, inventory management, the warehousing, the trading, which of course is the core operation, market data, again very core, and then clearing and settlement with a clearinghouse that is integrated into our design. So the core value proposition was integrity, 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 integrity of the product through the warehousing and the quality certification, integrity of the transaction through the clearing and settlement and the screening of trades and reconciliation and so on, and then the integrity of the actor. If any of you are familiar with the literature on agricultural markets in Africa or in any let's say frontier market, you know that relational trading is pretty much what we mostly have. So you will only trade with somebody who is related to you, or from your village, or your cousin's wife's brother, or something like that, because of the high risks. And I would hear this over and over, and I've done research in many African countries, and it's the same story you hear all the time. I don't know if I'll get the thing I've contracted. I don't know if it'll be in the quality that I wanted. I don't know if I'll get paid, and so on. So I don't know if I'll ever get it, or if it'll come on time, etc., etc. So all of these meant that we needed to create a way that anybody could trade with anybody, assured of delivery, of quality, of payment, and timing, time frame, let's say. So the design is a membership-based system. It's an electronic warehouse-based system with warehouses located in rural areas. We trade on the basis of standard trading contracts. And I was telling a friend over there that we did something very, very unusual in the design, which is that we basically built a spot exchange that, to all practical purposes, has the same logic as a futures contract platform, in that we have standardized delivery terms, product terms, trading terms, settlement terms, with the only exception, and a very important exception, of course, being that the delivery is immediate, within 10 days, rather than 3 months or 6 months or whatever out, and the margining is 100%, if you will, or none at all. I don't know if they want to look at it. There's always debates which way you should call it, but basically it's a cash up front and a commodity in warehouse, also a pre-trade deposit. So there's a 100% deposit on either side, if you will. We basically set up a very aggressive market data system with real-time price dissemination to website, rural electronic outdoor display boards, mobile telephony, SMS messaging, as well as IVR, which is a call-in service. We also have discrete time, which is the typical African market information system. I used to work in Mali in the early 1990s, setting up a market information system. And so what would happen is that the unit that I was in, which is the headquarters, would get every Wednesday information coming in from enumerators and a couple of dozen markets around the countryside who would send in slips of paper, literally, with couriers, and it would come into Bamako, and then we would enter it into a database, and then it would Friday morning put out on the radio and print. Obviously, we're well beyond that, but nonetheless, radio still is a very important medium. So our market data system, electronically, not on paper, spits information on the day's prices 3 times a day through the radio, and every night through the television. So the country is literally inundated with market data at this point. We also set up a clearinghouse, which was very ambitious in having a T+1 settlement system, which is that we trade today and trades are settled tomorrow. We are the only exchange in Africa, bar none. Johannesburg Stock Exchange is T+3, Nigeria Stock Exchange, Ghana Stock Exchange are all T+3, or Dar es Salaam T+5, and so on. So our idea was, despite a very weak financial infrastructure, a very weak, worse telecom infrastructure, we would commit that in our market, anybody, particularly if they go the small farmer, who typically doesn't get paid for weeks, and is usually never paid in the amount that they actually contracted for, would get paid the next morning. So anything traded today after 5 p.m. will be paid by 11 a.m. the next morning. And that's in itself, I think, a massive change. We have rules of the exchange, compliance functions, market surveillance, the usual good stuff. Now, this technology that powers all of this is quite unique because our model is very unique. So when we started having designed what we wanted, we went out to the market out there and said, now we're going to buy some off-the-shelf technology, customize it, and we put out a bid in 2007. Some Deutsche Bank and a few other major entities bid on this model that we had, and it came, and I'll share this with you, to $24 million to build the system that we wanted because of all the very unique aspects of what we were trying to do. So even people in the exchange space had really sort of a model that they would have to wrap their heads around. And we wanted everything integrated. So we decided to do something very bold, maybe a bit crazy, I would say. Probably one of the craziest things I decided to do was to build it ourselves. So in 2007, we brought in a team of people from around the world, some of Ethiopian origin and some not, and got some very smart young IT students together and built a system that now actually is a product that many countries are asking us to come and help them use. So this is, without getting into the details, the structure of our IT system. So anyway, so where we are today, we launched trading in April 2008. In fact, yesterday was our 4-year anniversary. Thank you. So we have, in this time frame, in terms of members, we have 450 members. We started with 100 founding members, and which we sold fixed membership seats, a fixed price of $5,000. A year and a half later, we auctioned 150 seats. There was enormous interest in buying seats. The average price went from $5,000 to $20,000, quadrupling. But the maximum bid price for a seat on our exchange was $311,000, which is about half the price of the seats in the Chicago Board of Trade. So these members are, of course, many of them intermediary members, brokers. So behind them, they are intermediating on behalf of several thousand small clients, farmers, farmer groups, small traders, etc., buyers as well. So we currently have about 11,000, but I could be wrong because that number seems to change daily, so it's growing very fast. 12% of our membership is made up of cooperative unions, farmer cooperatives, representing 2.4 million farmers. Last year we traded about 500,000 tons of commodity, coffee, sesame seed, beans, maize, and wheat. Actually, sorry, I didn't trade wheat last year. Representing $1.2 billion. Now, if you think of this being a spot, entire 100% physically delivered or physical delivered market, then if the futures off of this would be a multiple of 15 to 20 times. So this becomes a very big market. To give you some perspective, our coffee trading last year was 138,000 tons of coffee, which is 3.06 times the combined volume of Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda. So a big market. The warehousing has grown by leaps and bounds. We have now 17 warehouse sites, delivery sites, each of which has a laboratory and a full staff. We operate 55 warehouses around the countryside. We're about 300,000 metric ton capacity. Starting from one warehouse with 5,000 ton capacity, we have grown very dramatically in the 3-4 years. Last year we graded, handled, stored, traded, delivered 4.7 million bags. So the operational dimension of this and the fact that we're in this warehouse business is a pretty big deal. We actually would like to devolve that business. Our reach, as you can see, Ethiopia is a big country, and we have, this is a map showing warehouses around the country, as well as tickers, price tickers, the electronic price display boards. So where we are in terms of clearing, we have 10 partner banks. We've built an electronic interface to each of them, using protocols by the same standard as Citibank or any other international system. Last year, you can see that we did about double the number of payouts to sellers than pay-ins from buyers, which basically tells you that we have bigger buyers, logically, the exporters, industrial processors, compared to the small the small sellers who are much bigger in number. We settled by 11 a.m. the next morning. When we first told people this was going to be how we were going to do things, they just couldn't refuse to believe this. And especially the farmers, because they've been burned so many times. People had committed suicide in different parts of the country over the last decade. Before I actually moved back to Ethiopia, I'd heard these stories that people wouldn't get paid, they had family obligations, social obligations, school fees, etc., fertilizer loan repayments due, and they would basically go to the person that they had given supplier credit to, and wouldn't get paid, and this was really a very, very big social issue. In the coffee market, in the old auction, there was something called dry checks, which are blank checks, basically, where the exporters would write a check to the small trader supplying them, and then there would be no money behind it. So all sorts of things that really changed with our system. In terms of market data, we have the push and pull technology I described to you. We transmit prices in less than 2 seconds around the countryside. Our website is currently the second most visited on Reuters. We have agreements with both Reuters and Bloomberg. I was at Google a few days ago. Now I'm talking about getting the link with Google as well. And basically we are reached daily by about 100 countries, 107. We launched something a few months ago, about 8 months ago, called IDR, or Interactive Voice Response, which is a calling service. People can call in and get real-time updated prices off of the server. An automated voice basically with 4 local languages and sort of a menu-based system. We are getting about 1 million calls a month in this system. In fact, our telecom company, which is a very bureaucratic, government-owned entity, couldn't quite initially fathom that we were going to really generate this much traffic. So, and for that matter, it was hard for us to predict exactly what would happen either. So, after we started, we got such a massive response that it actually had to get shut down because the cables couldn't handle it and calls kept getting dropped. So, we had to go and get more equipment, and so it's been an amazing pattern on the call-in service. SMS, we have about 250,000 subscribers and really want to push out even more, but again, limited a little bit by the telecom company. So in this period, we've had 0 payment and delivery default, 0 trading order entry error, meaning if you traded coffee and there are many different origins and qualities, and so data clerk could easily make a mistake or the order could be entered in incorrectly, but the system itself catches these things because of course they happen, but we catch them. We haven't had a single day where our system was down or we had to go to any manual type of system. And even Ethiopian Airlines, which we're very proud of, after 60 years, occasionally when we get to the counter to check in, a very polite person will tell you, our system is down today, we're going to give you a manual boarding pass. Well, we haven't had to do that. So in recognition of that, we received last August the CIO 100 award, which is an award recognizing application of IT to business. We're the first company in Africa to receive this recognition. We also received last November the Agricultural Commodities Initiative of the Year from Africa Industry Magazine. In terms of some of the impacts, which I'm sure that some of you would like to maybe ask a little bit more about in the Q&A, but anyway, so I'll tell you a little story. When we first started, about 6 months into trading coffee, the Oromia Cooperative Farmers Union general manager told a story at a conference I was at, and he said, the farmers, there's 200,000 farmers in this union, so a delegation of farmers, very upset, came into his office and said, okay, now we know you've been cheating us. You've always, you're always suspected it, and now we know that we're being cheated because we're looking at the ECX display board in our town, and we see that the price that the co-op has been, paying out to us farmers is 80 birr per bag below what, what the highest price is on the board. And so this is, outrageous. They're very upset. The riot is starting. So he says, well, that's because that's the grade 7 price, and you're looking at the grade 2 price, and our coffee that we took and got rated and traded in ECX happened to be a grade 7. So they said, what's a grade 7? Then they pulled out the standards, and they said, well, if it has this % black beans, and it has a musty odor because we dried the beans on the ground, and it got a sort of earthy smell, and all these things that compromise the quality, then it gets a lower grade, and this is what happens. And they said, oh, well, we can do those things. We can dry it on a raised bed. We can pick out the black beans. We want to get the input. So they started to do that, and what we saw over the first 2 years of trading coffee is a tripling of the volume of the top 3 qualities of the coffee coming to the market. The other thing is that what we've been looking at over the last few years is that there's been a convergence growing between the local prices, where the farmers sell in the rural markets, and our ECX price, and for that matter, a convergence between the ECX market price and the New York reference price, to the order of almost 90% correlation between the local price and the global market price. Which basically also means that when you look at the farmer's share of the final export price, prior to ECX coming into existence, There were some PhD studies that estimated it at about 38%. In the case of grain, my own research, I looked at about 26 or 7% of the final price at the end of the chain being the share to the farmer. Now we look at the same ratio and see that it's doubled to about 65%. So what this basically means is that the margin, which, if you will, was composed of many things that really were there because of inefficiency. So the fact that the grain or the coffee changes hands 3-4 times, and at each time there's handling costs that accrue, short distance, high cost transport that accrues. So the chain basically is not only longer, but it's also at the end of the day the price has built up much more. The market inclusion is very important. Our market is increasingly attracting very small actors who are trading either through members as clients or coming in and forming private limited companies and becoming members of the exchange. And this has to do with the formalization of the informal sector. I had a couple of traders who used to trade in the old coffee auction, and they used to trade off of truck. They never had any office, they didn't have an accounting system, they basically were completely informal sector traders. And they came to our office, one of them came to my office with his son, a 10-year-old. And he said, I want my son to see that this is now where I trade. And every Friday, all the pieces of paper that you give me, the net obligation report from the clearinghouse, my warehouse receipt balance, my cash balance, all of these reports that are electronically generated, my son and I now file them every Friday when I come home from a week of trading. I file them in a binder, and that's in my living room. And I want my son to know that now this is the place where I trade, and I have a formal, proper business now. So he's very proud of being a member. And we've seen basically some of these traders taking night classes, learning how to use computers, and really feeling like they've joined the fold. In a country where even now, we're not there yet, there's still an incredible mistrust of the private sector and a lot of a strained, let's say, relationship between private and public. But we're inching towards a place where we'd like to get to. So, in terms of some of the new things we're setting up, we're in the process of launching warehouse receipt financing, where banks can lend against warehouse receipts for commodity in our warehouses. We are now devolving the warehouse operation to private third-party operators. We are this year hoping to pilot futures trading and an online trading system. We're putting up market information kiosks so that people not only get the data but also start to get more market intelligence. So it's not just what is the price today, but why is New York down? Is it what's happening in Colombia and Brazil? Forecasts of Chinese sesame consumption patterns, etc., etc. So these are things that we're now experimenting with. And as I said, I was at Google a few days ago, and we are thinking of partnering with them to start to build some apps around. Of course, they're always focused on Android apps, but whatever the apps are. But either way. Trying to get more content into the hands of people in our market. I titled my talk, so this is my last slide, on creating opportunities, and I wanted to give you a sense, particularly those of you in the business environment, that when it's like a ripple in a pond, where if you do one thing, it starts to change many things. And so we have seen that ECX's existence has catalyzed many things that really are on their own, take on a life of their own. So the direct impacts, of course, are on farmer livelihoods, on production patterns, on productivity, on incentives for better quality, improved food security, export performance, agro-industrial processing, even if you are on the fiscal side of things, improved tax administration, because the reporting and the actual transfer of tax payments is done through the exchange electronically. So these things are direct impacts, but the catalytic impacts are very significant. We are now seeing a storage service industry emerging, collateral management, logistics, because this is physical, so this commodity has to be transported, stored, weighed. So weighbridge services, conveyor belts, mechanized handling, all of these are now things that start to have a logic in our market. Quality management, pest management, fumigation, moisture drying, all sorts of things that are now becoming business opportunities because the exchange has standards and now we need these services in the broader ecosystem. Similarly, transport services, packaging. I could tell you many stories around packaging because it seems such a small thing in the grand scheme of all of this, but it's actually completely a vital part of all of this. Is the jute bags and where they come from, the polypropylene bags and the gram weight and how our ability to stack them in our warehouse depends on the thickness of the bags. And if those bags are not manufactured locally, then they become very expensive. And so that's now a new business opportunity for somebody that is investing in that business. So training services, market intelligence, data services, higher education. We have now an alliance with many of the universities to start developing a commodity trading diploma program. Business reporting along the lines of the Bloombergs of the world. There are people now in Ethiopia saying, I want to put out different language reports on the market trends, international trends, etc., etc. So all of these are opportunities that are catalyzed by this one thing that sparks the whole system. So with that, I will stop and say obviously that there's more to do. It's a continuum, but we're moving, we're growing. Is this what that's?
I'm just going to sit with you. Okay, so we thank Eleni for a wonderful conversation. This is actually just the Q&A session. Why they want me to sit here as well, I don't quite know, but that's what the bosses say I should do. So I'm going to be sitting here.
I think it's to catch the tomatoes or eggs.
Okay, when they're coming by. Okay, so I'm just going to sit here, and if there's a lull in the conversation, I will jump in with my own pet questions. Okay, but this is an opportunity for you guys to speak up, to ask questions.
I would like to know what's your greatest challenge right now at the exchange? Which is the one you think about, you aren't sleeping because of that? That's what I want to know. Okay.
Hi, my name is Puleng, and I'm from South Africa. I'm a Columbia student. So today I attended a food security seminar, and one of the things that they said is that in Africa, one of the biggest challenges that farmers have is pre-commercial food waste. And actually they were saying that it actually means that a lot of farmers don't have the technology or the storage facilities that they can use immediately after they do the harvest. And they were talking about innovative solutions that are coming like from Germany. I think there's a German company which is currently based in Nigeria, where they have a truck and they actually go to the farmers and they take the harvest like cassava, they put it inside and they grind it, and the paste that they get from that, they can actually store that for a period of about a year. So I would assume like such a challenge actually poses threats to your organization because it's all about the volumes. And I just wanted to find out if you are doing anything, have you identified any of those challenges in Ethiopia? And are you doing anything to actually empower the farmers? Because at the end of the day, it's the farmer has to make a profit from what they are selling into the market. Thank you.
Okay.
One more. Eunice.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what percent. Thank you. What percentage of Ethiopia's trade you're capturing on the ECX? And have you been approached, or have you thought of linking up the ECX with global exchanges? And then what and how?
Okay, so public-private.
Private sector problems or the private sector?
Yeah, the whole issue around mistrust. Before embarking on the Ethiopia project, I had worked in, I would say, about 9 different African countries as a development economist focusing on markets. And the same thing you hear everywhere you go. The evil middleman ripping off everybody, and basically the problem being the middleman. So this incredible amount of distrust, I think, is pervasive. Now, coming to Ethiopia and thinking of that as sort of history, in the context of history, I think the years of socialism or quasi-socialism that many African countries have gone through colors that thinking. And a friend of mine at SEC invited him to Ethiopia some years ago, and he gave a fantastic talk. He's a lawyer, he's the director of the Office of International Affairs, and he actually gave a fantastic talk about how the European 16th century laws, English code, common law, had explicit statements about this evil broker and the evil middleman, and how they were the parasite that needed to be, weeded out of our society, and that basically this is a pervasive sort of human sentiment that the middleman is feared and reviled and so on. But of course, things evolve, right? But in some sense, if you read the papers, even here, in recent regulations, there's still a sense that there's something fishy about these people that are trading and you don't quite know what exactly they're doing. So there's a lot of that in Ethiopia, and a lot of, I would say, policy makers' education that has been a big part of my job. Starting from a very fundamental idea that intermediation is it a good thing or a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Do we want to create a market for farmers to trade with exporters, or is it okay to allow people to be intermediaries trading on behalf of others? And so it took me a while to convince the people in government that actually intermediation was value-adding if done properly, and that basically we could create ways to ensure that it was done in a good way, welfare-enhancing, as opposed to what was something that they could fear. So this has been a big continuum. I don't think we're anywhere near the end of the road. But I think what has happened is, on both sides, there is a sense that institutions can actually protect against these feelings. So just to give you a small example, but quite a relevant one, about a year and a half ago, one of the people in government who has a personal bias that brokers are terrible, decided to issue a directive that would somehow limit the role of the brokers in our market. So I basically said that this was contradictory to the model and to the law that we had done. And in the end, that argument won. But the main point is that now we have an institution with its own logic, and that it gets us away from the individual perspectives. But anyway, I think it's by no means resolved. Okay, so on the question about challenges, there are many things that keep me awake at night. I'll tell you 2 very quickly. One is that we are growing very fast, and so the new Ethiopia, the passion, the excitement, the excellence as a business that I strive for is difficult to maintain when you're doubling your growth every year and having to hire. I mean, we went from 37 employees in April 2008 to almost 800 employees today. and another 1,000 contract employees. So this is now a huge company. So to manage, the human resources, to incentivize people, keep them innovative, risk-taking, and not hierarchical and bureaucratic. So that's one of my things that I worry about. The other is related to that, trying to devolve parts of the business and trying to find partners that can basically go with us. So warehouse operators, information providers, many pieces that we can devolve. The other thing that I think I worry about is protecting, and this goes a little bit to the previous question. Now, I didn't talk about one very important thing, like I actually had a slide, but I took it out, which is the balance of private and public. I referred to that when I first started, but in the sense that in our model, it's a demutualized exchange with the government as the sponsor or investor on a non-profit basis, and the private sector buying their seats on a for-profit basis. So you've got the private profit interests of the members of the exchange and the sort of social welfare interests of the government. So now the question is, who really controls the exchange? Is it the government side or the private side, and where does management come? Management has to balance these two sides. And that balancing act definitely keeps me awake at night, because if you make one side, if both sides are complaining, then you think you're probably getting it right. I mean, that's generally what seems to happen. That I never make either side really happy, and that's okay. But it's a balancing act that is tricky, and I think any PPP model, by its nature, is going to have that tension. So let's say, for example, on our board we have private actors and government actors, and the private guys don't want to add any more membership, because the more you increase the membership, their share is diluted, so to speak. Our prime minister goes out and makes speeches about how the exchange is going to have every commodity in the country in it one day. That's his dream. So that means we need more actors, more members, and so then we go back and there's always this kind of, no, I want to keep my pie the way it is versus the other side. So these are the kind of things that we discuss openly. I can tell you these things because it's important for you to know. The question about processing post-harvest is not at all contradictory or a threat to having a market, because down the road we could be trading chocolate. It doesn't have to be cocoa beans. It's a market for whatever it is that people are buying and selling. So there's nothing about what we do that is restricted to having commodities be in a particular stage of processing. In fact, in beans, for example, and also in our sesame trade, we have a contract for unprocessed, and we have a contract for processed beans. So if it's been machine processed, then there are different buyers interested in machine processed who will be willing to pay a higher price than the unprocessed. So our grading system basically adapts to either. So we could have in Nigeria a market for cassava paste just as much as we could have. In fact, it's harder for us to have a market for cassava itself, because cassava is very perishable and it would be difficult to be able to store and standardize it. So basically the flexibility is, I think, the key point. And in fact, if anything, we'd like to encourage to move up the quality ladder, which is obviously what we're interested in. You asked about the share of market. Basically, it depends which commodity, and also whether there's regulations that are requiring it to be traded in the exchange or not. So we've mostly focused for the last few years on the export commodities that the government has wanted us to basically trade in the exchange as part of the policy governing those markets. It wasn't terribly successful, partly because the flow of capital, the capital restrictions of India didn't allow people to basically use the Indian trade as a hedge against international or vice versa. So I think in our case, that's one of the lessons we've taken, is that it's not really about whether we can do it or not, we can design it, but it's about capital flow restrictions, and also whether Ethiopia, like India, would be willing to have foreign institutional investors trading directly in its market. China, for example, does not allow foreign companies. Like, for example, Cargill is not allowed to be a member of the Chinese exchange. India, more or less the same thing. India recently opened up investment ownership, maximum 5% stake. I think Goldman Sachs had 8%, and they have now to reduce it to 5% of ownership in an Indian exchange. So there's still a lot of tension around these things, and what matters is the strength of your regulator. Our regulator is an infant regulator at this point. In fact, my project set up the regulator as well. So I think we'll get there, but I don't think we're quite ready yet.
Paul? Anybody over here? The students in particular? All right, who's a student? All right, we got a student over there. Okay, you go next. And number 3 over there. Okay, I have 4. Right?
Hi. Well, first, congratulations on the great work you're doing. I think it's fantastic. If you look at Africa from a continental perspective, and if you think about development as a continent, are you of the opinion that it's in the best interest of Africa as a whole to have 55 national exchanges, or that perhaps it's better to have regional exchanges that are very strong, or ultimately that there should be a continental exchange so that to compete with Chicago and other of these global exchanges that set a lot of trend of agriculture development for the world?
Sure, good question. Okay.
Let me join to congratulate you on this, beautiful work you've done. But I'm not a business guy. I'm from the Wagner Public Service, so I will be speaking from the service perspective. I'm conscious to know about the word investors, looking for investors. The Independent in January reported tens of thousands of Ethiopians farmers have been forced off their land by investors. So could it be with this kind of model, there's been some attraction globally, so there's a lot of people coming in, putting people into starvation, putting people who were landowners initially to become destitute in their own lands? Could that be the whole idea? Because I believe Africa can feed the world if we coordinate ourselves. And this is part of coordination. So how can we realize that? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Marina, and I'm very interested in how to translate big ideas into actionable, tangible steps. And from that point of view, I'm very interested in hearing, according to you, what were the key, crucial operational elements that made the exchange a success?
Can I start with the last one?
We got one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for this presentation. I think your work has been exemplary. My name is Wale Idris. I am the Executive Director of African Views Organization. I have a background in market analysis, so I'm with you right there. I think this is fabulous. The fact that you went on to build that model, I think that in itself is a great investment, and I do hope that you make that available for other regional exchanges that might be coming out along the line. My question is in 2 parts. I'm going to ask you a very easy one first. That is, I would imagine that there is an ECX index which measures the broader market. And I'd like you to please share with us the performance of the index over the years.
Okay,
Also,
the index, which measures what?
The broader market. The broader market.
The broader market.
The ECX. And so I would imagine you have an index. And which commodity is making the best performance. That's one question. The other question is slightly difficult, and I apologize for placing it forward. How do you, with the advent of this success, that's just really beginning, especially with the dam, I think your farmers are in for a treat. They're in for a great growth, and I wish you all the success. What are the mechanisms that you have in place for AML? I'm talking about anti-money laundering.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me see.
So regional trade, investors and starvation, key elements to success, and then the two questions.
Okay, the hard of the hard. Okay, so should we have 55 national exchanges, or some regional, or some continental? You know, if I were to whip out my crystal ball, I could maybe tell you, but I think that these things have their own logic and rationale. There is, in my mind, a compelling logic to have, at least for me, to start with some sense of a national perspective on at least where one starts. Because I think every country starts with its own national objectives, or basically it's got buyers, it's got sellers, but that doesn't mean that's where we end up. Then maybe I'm being a bit inelegant in my answer, but let me give you a different way of looking at it. We have, for example, specific commodities in certain countries that have their own specific buyers and sellers, much like you have in a country people that want to go to certain places on planes, for example. So where we start might be that we say we're going to set up a small airline that will service, you know, the couple hundred people a day that need to get from Kumasi to Accra, or from Arusha to let's say Dar es Salaam. But and that is important because those people need to be transported around, and we care about them. And if you're a government, then that's where you want to start caring about them. But pretty soon, it also becomes clear that if you linked into South Africa Airways or Ethiopian Airlines and shared some of their passengers, or gave them some of your passengers who need to go to India or China, then you have a common interest in, let's say, code sharing. So you still serve your own constituents, your own smaller market, but you have access to a bigger stream of market service through your alliances with other markets. So we've had a bit of a raging debate on this point in different conferences, and I've been pretty vocal on this point that, in my view, we might all end up with a massive continental exchange. We might not. But where we should start is making sure that we're adding value to people that are in need. So if Western Ethiopians need to sell their maize to people in northern Ethiopia who are in deficit areas and need to get food, otherwise they have a problem, then that's where we should start. Now, if those northern Ethiopians can also start getting food from neighboring Kenya, and we make that easy, then very quickly we'll get to that. So for me, the interest is not to have closed economies and box things into narrow little boxes, but to think of a code sharing model based on market logic rather than some sort of politically motivated Pan-African regional thing. Because, you know, at this conference that we organized in Ethiopia in November, I actually had the declaration from the African Union in 1991. about the importance of an African commodity market and establishing a regional, a continental commodity exchange. There actually is an article in the summit declaration, and I said, these 55 countries, by the time they all figure out how to release their monetary policies and all of that, things would have come and gone. On the other hand, if we organically start things very soon, and I'm helping several countries help get started on starting exchanges, very soon it will be very logical for us to link our Ethiopian coffee price index with the Kenyans, the Rwandans, the Ugandans, and the Tanzanians, and to create a linked East Africa coffee index or even a linked platform with delivery in any one of these 5 countries. We'll get there. We'll get there pretty soon. But I think we don't. If we think that we should start there, then we may never get there. That's my fear. But we will, I think, end up there. And by the way, there's nothing magical about the geography of Africa. For example, for our pulses, our beans, chickpeas, mung beans, etc., we may well prefer to set up a cross-listing, not with another African country that doesn't have those particular commodities, but with our counterpart in India. Because there are exchanges in India that are actually listing similar chickpea commodity contracts as we have, we're starting to develop. So there's nothing specifically unique that we have to create an African exchange, Pan-African. We might have cross-listing or code-sharing with wherever it makes sense, and we should be open to that. So that's my answer to that, and I'm sorry if it was a bit clumsy, but hope you got that message. What was my second question? Investment. Okay, the thing is, a few years ago I was reading the paper, a Sunday paper in Ethiopia, and I saw that the Saudis had just been given 300,000 hectares. And I immediately got very nervous, called somebody in the government and said, why are we doing this? This is terrible. Here we are, still, can't feed ourselves, and what are we going to do? So that ended up being a big conversation. But the facts are on the ground that I believe the number is 67, or is it 76? I think it's 67% of arable land in Africa has yet to be cultivated. Okay? This was a recent McKinsey report that Africa is the only region on earth where there's so much land that is able to be cultivated. So we're not talking about the deserts and all that, arable land that has not come under cultivation. We also know that the land that is cultivated by smallholder farmers is some of the least productive in terms of yield per hectare. So in Ethiopia, for example, we're getting about 1.8 tons per hectare of maize, and that's the highest, 1.2 in the case of our national staple, compared to 7 tons that can be achieved in the fields in Iowa or even achieved in Punjab, 6 tons. So there's something about learning what others are doing and importing capital-intensive technology into our agriculture so that we produce more, whoever it is that's going to produce it, especially if we have all this untapped land that we have waiting to be cultivated. Third, the world's food stocks are going down. In fact, there is a historic low of global food stocks over the last 50 years that has sort of become partly the reason why we have the kinds of commodity price shocks that we're seeing. It's not the only reason, but it's an important reason. And so basically, the world is looking for where more food can be produced to raise global stocks back to where they should be. So Africa, I believe, is in a fantastic situation if it can do it right. So if we can develop policies and regulatory frameworks that allow people to bring technology, generate employment, raise yields, and grow more food, but in such a way that we are capturing the benefits of it on the continent, then I believe that we're better off. If we do it in such a way that this is diverging from my topic altogether, but I'll just throw it in. If we do it in such a way that basically the investor, the land grabber, let's call them, to be provocative, comes in, grows food, and takes it all out, then we're just where we were before. So it's if you will, the upside risk that we should be trying to capture, because the downside is where we are now. It's not like we're taking people off land where they were if the policy is that we're giving land. I can't speak for every country, and I don't have the capacity to respond to whether, and people should be checking if it is land that was uncultivated that's being given. That's the Ethiopian government's official line. Is that true? Is that not? I don't know. But if it's true, and if that policy is actually implemented, then we have upside risk. So that's an empirical question, but anyway, my perspective on it is that the world needs to grow more food. We need to grow or increase our technology, so we can figure out how to use. When countries let big companies come in and build cars or put in plants, they learned how they did it at the same time. So there's a technology transfer that happens almost even if you didn't actually force it to happen, you would learn. So just by the fact that you have more production being done in different ways and with better technology and so on, there's going to be something that we'll learn, even if we didn't see a bit of that thing. But ideally, and what we should be doing, and I don't have, unfortunately, I'm not in that space of negotiating on this issue in Ethiopia, but in my mind, that's where we should be going. I was at a function a few weeks ago with the head of USAID came to Ethiopia, and it was a private sector dinner, and so it's the head of Karaturi, which is the famous company, the Indian company that has the biggest farm in the world, happens to be in Western Ethiopia. And so the administrator, Rasha, asked the head of the Karaturi company, how's your farm going, and what's happening, and he said two things. He said, one is, we don't have access to all these services that we need. We need people to put up storage infrastructure. We need better logistics. We need packaging. We need all this. And when we get all that and we produce more, we have a plan that we're going to be selling it through the exchange into the Ethiopian market. Some will export, but a significant amount we're going to sell here. So it could even be that we will get cheaper food going to local consumers if we do it right. I don't know where these things are, and I encourage you to get the facts, because I don't have all those facts, but I think if we get it right, it will be a good thing. But that's the whole crux of the matter. And the other question?
Marina asked about key elements of success.
Oh yeah. I was going to start with that because that's actually my favorite question. I think that what made ECX possibly the secret to what we've done is that the model that we put together was not a piecemeal model. We, from the get-go, said, we've seen how things work in development. The Japanese, and I'll tell you this is exactly what happens in my little part of development. The Japanese have a pet project, they love to fund grades and standards. The Americans, you say it always goes to a country in markets, observer says we need better markets, right? So the Americans can say, oh, we need a market information system, we'll help you put up that. There's an entity in Amsterdam which works with the European Union called the Common Fund for Commodities, and their thing is putting up warehouse receipt systems. So everybody has a little corner of the thing. So you got a warehouse receipt system, but no grades and standards in one country. You got a market information system, but no warehouse system in another country. So I spent years looking at all these things that were piecemeal. Zambia put up a very expensive warehouse receipt system, but there was nowhere to trade the warehouse receipts. There was no information on the pricing of the receipts or where they were going to be traded. So therefore, the banks refused to lend against the collateral in the warehouse. It was too risky, so the scheme collapsed. When I was doing my PhD research in Ethiopia, MSU, Michigan State via USAID, had a $2 million project doing market information where they were sending people out on bicycles, collecting the prices. That's the same thing like I did in Mali. So I asked the traders and the farmers, I said, so are you listening to the radio and using this, really nice thing that has been now set up? And they said, oh, absolutely not. It's completely useless. These prices, we don't know which wheat. Is it the white wheat from Ada or from wherever? And sure enough, I saw that there were 14 types of wheat, and none of that nuance of quality differentiation was being picked up by the market information. Because that would make too costly for the market information system to try to get all of that. Nor were they even saying this is the one type that we're going to do, so you could reference off of it. They just hadn't thought about that part. So my point is, if we don't do it together holistically and bring people along with it, because they buy into this model, then we might as well not do it. We're just going to waste money. So that's, I think, the secret to what we did, based on the fact that I'd spent more than a decade looking at all of these efforts and seeing that they didn't work. We don't have so the hard question that you asked first, the first of your two hard questions, was in fact, I don't think I can answer either really, but we don't have an index of which one is doing, that's something we should be, we haven't yet done, but I can tell you that, coffee is the one that sort of keeps us awake at night, because coffee is so controversial. It's got such specificities, very geographically oriented. There's a whole segment of the coffee market globally that's the specialty segment. It's fast growing but small but very vocal. So we have to tailor our market to that. So how well we've done on coffee is probably the metric of how well the exchange is going. And so I would say that it's work in progress. When I go out to the countryside, I hear over and over, the farmers saying, well, now we know what the prices are. Now we get paid on time, so therefore we're pricing our market. In fact, the funny thing about coffee is that the political economy of coffee really is changing dramatically. When I first started all of this, the coffee exporters were the sort of the movers and shakers, really, of Ethiopia's economy, period. And so you find a lot of the small farmers and traders saying, these exporters, we run our life, we're nothing, and we're subject to all their whims, and they know what's happening in New York, we have no idea. Now we have town hall meetings where I was just in one about 3 weeks ago, where the exporters said, these suppliers are now dominating the market. They know what we're going to trade in New York. They've got their links with the farmers. We have to be the price takers now. This is ridiculous. And so when we first started, 10 days into our start of our coffee market, the Exporters Association, very highly well-connected people, came to our office and said, we're here to demand that you shut down the website. We refuse to have coffee prices on the ECX website, because now people all over the world know exactly what price we're buying at. The farmers know what price we're buying at, and this is unacceptable. And in fact, they were going to go to the National Bank governor and sort of justify that this was going to hurt Ethiopia to have this kind of information flow. So again, that's the kind of stuff that we addressed, and we said, no, that's not possible. This is what what we're doing is exactly putting our information in. Anyway, so all this to say that we'll come back to you with a proper answer.
My name is Abdi Halabakar. I'm Ethiopian. I'd like to comment on the lady's question about the issue of mistrust in the markets in Ethiopia. If I recall, the mistrust was a matter of a change of administration in 1974 when the royal family was deposed from power. And subsequently, corrupt elements came because of the revolutionary administration, and the current regime as well. Initially started out with the Marxist philosophy. The skepticism now towards the ECX comes from many layers, and if you have an opinion. In studying the proclamation contradicts statements you've made repeatedly on TED.com in a lot of venues that this was a market-based solution to Ethiopia's problems, where in fact, as you've shown us today, that grading, trading, transporting, market surveillance are all controlled by the government. Now, I have the proclamation at home. So they go. In the West, and you can Google this easy, even here, the exchanges and the agricultural industry functions on substantial government investment. Now let's say your commodity exchange succeeds, and you're telling us that there's convergence of price with what's out in the West. Our farmers, however, during market volatility, are not going to be financially supported by the government. What would you do when that occurs? Because it will occur.
Okay.
All right.
The question.
I mean, I have other questions, but we're out of time.
Got it. Go ahead. Very quickly, please.
My name is Apainesh, and I thank you very much for the wealth of information. It's really highly appreciated, and you are a daughter of Ethiopia, so am I. My question is, you gave us a good package on the business aspect. My field, my expertise, or my interest is health. How healthy are these farmers? And have you ever considered about comprehensive health care for the farmers, especially male farmers, and their wives and children, and the entire village? Because they do die so young, and even if we teach them high tech, they're not gonna last. This intelligent presentation is not gonna go down to the next generation. So what do you have for me in terms of their health?
The very last one, the last person, yes.
All right, my name is Fabrice, and I was wondering, I watched a video on TED that a couple days ago, and you mentioned that Africa and pretty much that countries, most of our farmers are doing less capital intense agriculture compared to South America or Asia. And I was curious to know, I mean, how do you feel about it now that you have established ECX? And how are farmers back in Ethiopia somewhat farming? Are they using labor intensive or capital intensive? And also, coming from a trading background, how are you guys pretty much able to establish a T+1 setting period?
Okay, good. Maybe I'll start with the last one. You asked two questions actually, but the T+1 basically, we looked at some different models of how to do it and came up with typical institutional innovation, which is that all of our members have open up a pay-in and a pay-out account with one of our partner settlement banks. So basically, part of the membership requirement is that they give us power of attorney to do transfers in and out of their pay-in and pay-out accounts. So then basically, and we saw a variant of this in India, but then we went a little bit further. So what happens is they have other accounts, their current account, they have $20 million, but if tomorrow they want to trade 500,000 worth of something in ECX, they'll move 500,000 into that pay-in account, which basically is a blocked account. So we do a balance inquiry every day, and then basically our system, our trading system allows them to trade up to the amount in their pay-in account. So we have an electronic sort of setting of their position limit. And then at the daily, following the daily, every morning at 8, we do a debit instruction from the pay-in accounts into our settlement account in each of the settlement banks that we have. And then at 10 a.m. we do a balance inquiry to make sure the monies have been transferred. And at 11, we do a payout instruction. Now, Ethiopia recently has changed this a few months ago, but when we started, and for several years, did not have a national payment system. So the way that checks clear between people in Ethiopia, between the banks, is that every week they would literally manually swap checks, all right? So we're in the world where there's a manual transferring of checks between the banks, and we're basically saying you can trade with any of all the banks are in our system, so anybody that has an account with any of the partner banks that we have can be paid the next day. So in order to enable that to happen, we had to build in an extra piece, which is our innovation, which is that we did what international banks do on correspondence banking of interbank. So a mirror account, let's say between Citibank and United Bank of Africa and Nigeria. Well, we basically required, and this was a policy that the National Bank had to basically rewrite to allow this to happen, that each of our 10 partner banks has a mirror account in the other bank. So that basically means when we do the balance inquiry, and it turns out that all the buyers, the private exporters, are banking, let's say, the big urban private banks, and all the farmers, which seems to be the case, bank in the state-owned bank, which has many more branches in rural areas. Then we need to pay out in the rural branches of the state bank, but the money came in the Addis Ababa-based private banks. So at 10 a.m. we do interbank transfer requests to move money from the private banks to the state bank so that we can pay out the state bank. So a lot of crazy things, but believe it, and the biggest part is the culture, because the banks initially thought, well, yeah, we have a settlement manager, and we'll do whatever you ask us to do. But of course, they would I remember when we were doing integration testing. It turned out that the settlement manager had gone to a funeral, so they couldn't do the transfer, and so that kind of stuff is unacceptable. So to change the culture of how business is done, the banks, every piece of all this was a big struggle. The other question was
about the capital intensive labor.
Yeah. So basically, when I was back in my research days, we measured that the capital intensity in Ethiopian agriculture was about 6%, which meant that if you think of the production factors, labor, land, and capital, then only 6% comes from capital. So no modern seed, no fertilizer, no irrigation or none, and mostly it's labor being applied to the land. So that is something that we've been, of course, working on, but that's not a direct project that we have. But there's now a new entity called the Agricultural Transformation Agency that has actually come into play to work exactly on these kinds of questions in Ethiopia, funded by Gates and UNDP and others. And they're basically writing a new seed law that will allow a lot more seed companies to come into Ethiopia, market seed aggressively, and increase sort of financing for seed and fertilizer purchase. So hopefully we're getting there, but I don't know where it is now. There was a question about health. I don't have a good answer because that's really completely outside of my field, but I'll tell you one small thing that you might find relevant. When we were starting the market, I got a visit from the Addis Ababa Millers Association, which is the association of the small little neighborhood mills all over Addis Ababa and many of the big cities. In fact, myself, when we need to buy wheat flour for the family, my driver goes and buys a bag of wheat, unprocessed, takes it to the neighborhood mill, has it milled, and then brings it home. So the millers who run these little mills said, we want to join the exchange as soon as possible. We are going to be your first members because we are sure that the citizenship of this city, the residents of this city, are eating ground bricks, ground dust and dirt because of the lack of standards in the market. And it's a shame that things that in other countries would not be fit for human consumption are what Ethiopians eat because of the fact that there's no grading system, no trading system on the basis of grade. So we will be the very first people that you will see buying grain for our milling through the exchange. Because it's not only a health issue, it's also a machinery's utilization. Our machines break down because of pebbles that are included in the grain, adulteration that's rampant. So we're hoping that somebody will measure whether or not there's better grain quality and more health because of that. I just kind of asked some very important questions. We've had many conversations. It's an old friend. I would say that what you asked, though, is essentially whether or not farmers should have some kind of subsidy to smoothen price volatility. My feeling about that, and I believe the prevailing sentiment in Ethiopia with the government, is that these subsidy schemes over time are very, very distortionary and unsustainable. The WTO is trying to dismantle them all over the world. So the approach that we have with our market is to try to build in risk management instruments to dampen or at least manage volatility. So of course futures markets and helping farmers use futures markets and use the ECX instrument as a market, not as a interventionist or subsidy, is really what we think is the way to go. So we have actually a big project funded by the European Union, and this goes a little bit to a question I was asked about farmers' capacity, to build the capacity of farmers to really access the market. So I think that was to your question. So for example, in this project, what we are trying to do is, okay, we have the exchange, it's there, the prices are discovered on the exchange. Now how do you link people who may not have the capacity to know what kind of quality they have and what kind of, what the weight of their product is, etc. So what we're trying to do now with our project with the European Union, and Gates is also talking to us about adding money into that, is to basically create service-giving entities in the rural areas that before they come to ECX, it would be pre-screened and graded, pre-screened for quality and weight, and moisture also checked, so that they can basically a little bit more reliably use the ECX market. But I don't think at this point, it's hard for me because I've written many books about anti-subsidies and not intervening on prices. It's hard for me to tell you that subsidizing prices is a good thing.
But as we saw in the market in 2007, bear with me, please. As we saw in the market in 2007, the consistent policy of Western regimes has been historically. Greece currently? No. They're telling them austerity. Greece is austerity, Ireland is austerity, Iceland is austerity. And in the past, whether it's Mexico, Argentina, Malaysia, Thailand, it's austerity. However, when the chicken comes home to roost in the United States, the steel industry gets bailed out, the auto industry gets bailed out, the farmers get bailed out, Wall Street gets bailed out. So our farmers are competing with people here who are being bailed out. If you just Google, the agricultural industry gets approximately $50 to $70 billion every year of tax money here. And our farmers are going to be competing with that price. Our consumers are going to be competing with that price. And the ECX is facilitating that.
But I mean, I guess your point is not so much a question for an exchange, it's a question for policy. So in other words, we have the New York Stock Exchange that doesn't intervene in prices, but if there's a bailout that's happening that's a different policy than whether the exchange is discovering prices at the market. So very interesting point, but really not an exchange-related issue.
So, number one is that Africa House has two affiliated institutes, if you will. One of them is Development Research Institute. The other is Center for Technology and Economic Development. So we are actually beginning programs in the establishment of commodity exchanges in poorer countries. The pluses, the minuses, perhaps some of these issues. So all the students around, I know some of our PhD students. Where's Georgia? Georgia, where is she? She's gone, okay, so she's involved in that. So we'd like your collaboration. Those of you who work on Wall Street and have experience in commodities exchanges, and so I'm looking at Eunice, can you raise your hand there? She was my PhD student here at NYU, and now she's working on Wall Street and makes much more money than I do, okay? She's well. So you should come back and come and help us as well. We need all of you, your help. And then just to close, again, to the students, so this letter that I wrote to you is actually dated April 14th, and there's no date, okay? So I'm not gonna, but she was an undergraduate student. I forgot to mention that, okay? So all these great ambitions she had about establishing something was as a senior, okay, as an undergraduate. So those students who have big ambitions, big dreams, please follow them, and hope to see you, the students, in a few decades' time doing wonderful things in the world. So on that note, please another big round of applause.